Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Virtual Teams and the Critical Role of Effective Communication webinar. My name is Caitlin Futch, and I am an Associate Marketing Manager at the Myers-Briggs Company. Today's webinar will run for about an hour, so please feel free to submit questions at any time using the chat function. And if we don't have time to get to them at the end, we'll definitely reach back out to follow up with you to answer those questions. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording and the slides and a few other resources within the next few days. So now I am happy to introduce our speaker, Dr. Rachel Cubas-Wilkinson, Principal OD Consultant from the Myers-Briggs Company's Professional Services team. Rachel is passionate about people development, self-awareness, and leadership, and her team partners with organizations of all types to develop staff and leaders and to resolve people development challenges. Rachel holds a doctoral degree in transformative leadership from the University of New England, and she received her master's degree in leadership and a graduate concentration in adult learning methods, curriculum, and instruction. Welcome, Rachel, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you everybody for joining this webinar. We're so excited that you're here with us. We're going to make it pretty participatory in terms of asking you along the way to interject your thoughts and areas of things that are really resonating for you. I want to jump right in. We're going to talk quite a bit today about virtual communication and virtual teams, but I wanted to kind of start with just letting you guys know, in terms of the Myers-Briggs Company, our mission here is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. And I think that fits really nicely with what we're spending our time today in this session doing, which is trying to think about how we can help every single staff member and every virtual team that has gone virtual and needs to figure out ways to communicate effectively, poignantly, and in a way that also attends to their own well-being. And so I think that fits really, really nicely. And I just want to kind of jump in a little bit with kind of a big picture perspective. So we live in a very virtual world, this sort of concept of being everywhere, being anywhere, being able to pull up a device and do pretty much anything. In fact, I'm going to sort of vulnerably show you my to-do list here of some things that I've been working on. And I want you to picture this as Post-it notes all over my desk and my monitor. And I'm hoping that you're starting to actually look at some of these. Some of them may make you chuckle. Some of them may be quite similar to things that you're doing. But the common denominator of all of these little to-do items is that I've done all of them from my computer. I've done all of them from my virtual workspace here at home, all hours of the night, all hours of the day. And to think about that in terms of, it wasn't that long ago that doing half of these things in a totally virtual setting would have seemed like something out of the Jetsons, would have seemed like something futuristic. And it's amazing to think now that we can experience the lens structure, do pretty much anything online, and that's pretty fascinating. It's no wonder that because of this sort of global move towards virtuality, towards virtual work, that it's actually spilling into the world of work as well. Upon kind of like last statistics, it's really 4 in 10 American workers that spend at least some of their time on a regular basis working remotely. Certainly the current environment that we're in right now with recent developments from the last few weeks has augmented that number, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But it's interesting to note that on a regular basis, at least 4 in 10 American workers are already working from home. This includes small companies, medium-sized companies, big companies like Cisco, who in 2019 went virtual in their work and gave the flex virtual work option to 80% of their workforce. So that's 80,000 employees globally were told, you can work from anywhere, work from home, anywhere you'd like to be. And the results for Cisco were pretty staggering. So not only did they save $490 million in just real estate investment and being able to not invest as much in physical resources, but they also found this, what they believe to be tangential outcome, which is that employee satisfaction increased dramatically. And I want you to give some thought to, why that might be. Are there benefits that you can see personally for yourself if you had the opportunity to work flexibly, to work from home, to work from anywhere? And I think for most of us, the answer is yes. We could come up with, a few of those specifically. Even institutions that have not already strategically embraced working remotely are starting to notice this idea that physical meetings, even if we're in the same building, even if we're in the same floor, a lot of coworkers, a lot of peers, colleagues are no longer even doing physical meetings. In fact, if you look at kind of this bottom line down here of this graph, it appears as though physical meetings are on the decline by 44%, whereas online collaborative platforms like Skype, Microsoft Teams, this Zoom boom that's happening right now, right, those are up 70%. And this is for companies that are co-located, that are working in the same building. So obviously they're not even having to rely on that 100%, but they're moving in that direction because folks are just starting to use those platforms more and more. So this idea of communicating virtually is really kind of hitting every employee across the workforce in some kind of way. And so here's kind of what we end up with. We end up with, for the individual, for you and I, we end up with the fact that we have increased flexibility in the job market, that we can likely work in our desired job, in our desired industry from pretty much anywhere. That's the number of industries where that's true is expanding on a regular basis. For organizations, that also means that we are increasing our use and our reliance of remote workers and virtual machines to achieve results, to get things done, to go about the business that we do. And then for the global workforce, it means that we're moving towards these virtual work conditions and collaboration as the norm, even for fully located and on-site teams. And so when you put all these together, we're sort of living in this new normal. And we may not need to call it necessarily a revolution because we probably should have seen some of this coming, but at minimum, it should at least be thought of as a new normal. And then fast forward into our sort of current environment, right? This is sort of prevalent in all of our minds right now, this reality of COVID-19, this reality of the virus and what it's done for so many different institutions who did not intend to move remotely, didn't have a plan for doing so. And it sort of thrust the sudden change for so many organizations. And so I'm kind of calling this, at least for the purposes of today, the new normal. And that's this reality that for many of us who were used to going into the office, used to going into work normally, for a lot of us, the space of work has changed, kind of from what's on the left to what's on the right, in a matter of days, right, in a matter of weeks. And we're not quite sure how things are going to shake out, what's going to happen afterwards. But I'm inclined to think that for a lot of organizations and for a lot of people, they will have been exposed to virtual work in a way that will change their perspective on it forever. There will probably be more conversations about, well, can't we move remotely on a more regular and ongoing basis for a lot of roles? Certainly that's not all roles. I am beyond thankful for our delivery workers, our folks who do maintenance, all those folks who are still considered essential, but for a lot of organizations, especially those who sort of didn't catch the desire for virtual work even earlier on, I think it's going to be more and more of a question for folks. I also think employees are going to be more and more interested in virtual work now that they've sort of begun to see the possibilities around it. So very, very interesting. But let me pause there and ask this question. How are you personally experiencing the new normal? How has the space and the place of work changed for you as a result of this new normal? And what I'd like to invite you to do is use your questions function. I know you say chat, but it's questions. Use your questions function and type in for us just your thoughts on what I'm asking here. And we're going to pause for just a moment and we're going to take a look at some of what you guys are saying. Just engage with me for a second. How are you experiencing this new normal personally? And Caitlin, I'd like to ask your help to just kind of let me know what you're starting to see. Hopefully folks are beginning to share, feel like they can do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm seeing a lot of people talking about the interruptions they have to deal with animals, with children during calls, and definitely having to share space with other people, whether it's a spouse or roommates. Um, there's a lot about the feeling busy and not having the balance of work life, maybe accidentally working 13-hour days without really realizing it. those are quite a bit of what we're seeing come through the chat.
Those are such good points. And I'll tell you a funny story that I was just talking to a friend the other day, and she was saying that for the very first time, she was under the same roof working with her husband. And she said that she overheard her husband on a phone call answer the phone during work hours saying, "How can I help you today?" And she kind of chuckled at me and she said, "I'd like to know, I'd like the how can I help you guy to come home at night and to be available for me at night and on the weekends." And I just kind of chuckled about that because the reality for us is we have not seen this new normal, and it has created a tremendous amount of disruption for many of us. So I kind of wanted to at least recognize that, at least say, you know, there's a human side to virtual work, and more so when it's sudden. It's different if you're a company that's creating a plan to go virtual a year from now. But when you do it suddenly, when you do it unexpectedly, we begin with these subtle little things of losing our daily routine, losing physical connection and presence. But then these things, if we're not careful with them, if we don't do the self-care and the organizational support that people need, they turn into uncertainty, disorientation, stress, and really just all these underlying concerns. And we all know what happens when we're concerned and we're under stress and we're not having the proper amount of communication coming at us. We fill in the blanks ourselves. And oftentimes we fill in the blanks with possibly realities that are actually quite more detrimental, perhaps more catastrophic, perhaps more negative than they really are. So I wanted to just pause there and say, if you're a people manager, reach out to your folks because this is probably stuff they're feeling and they may not be articulating. And I recognize that you're feeling it yourself, but as a people manager, you have that responsibility to reach out to them. So I just wanted to kind of recognize that for just a minute there. So as we transition to talk about the context of virtual teams then, whether you plan to go virtual, whether it was imposed because of the current reality or anything else, it sort of evokes this question for us of how then do we successfully navigate team communication in a virtual environment? And I want to just establish this baseline. So I'm not trying to be negative Nancy here, but these are things that are team building blocks and derailers for any team in the world, regardless of whether you're located in a physical office or you're not. So you have to have these pillars already ready to go. The mission, people knowing what the organization exists for, you having gone through the work of helping them connect their work to their passions, to their motivations, so that they connect what they're doing on a daily basis with that mission. Then knowing what I do on the team, what is it that I bring that it matters, the quality of workload, all these kinds of things. And then also, of course, organizational support, not the least of which is a really good people manager that provides consistent support, removes bottlenecks, clarifies organizational processes. If this doesn't already exist on your team, I'm not suggesting that this has to be in place before you even think about going virtual, because I think there's always even room for improvement on these things. But I am suggesting that going virtual is not going to solve these. In fact, especially if you're going virtually suddenly, it's going to actually augment the frustration and the challenge that people feel. And so there's going to be a need that if you are in a situation where you've gone virtual suddenly, take a look at these things and pay particular attention to putting in a plan in place to at least sort of mitigate these challenges in the interim of time while you're able to work on them in a sort of more long-term focus. Okay, now that we've talked about that, let's look specifically when you're talking about virtual teams and those virtual teams communicating, then what is the role of the organization? What should we be doing right now? How should we be helping our team members? And your research shows us at the core, there's 3 responsibilities of the organization. The very first one is you need to provide the technology and tools that folks will need to be successful. Think here about what do I need to be able to do my job in a virtual space? Just think about that question and make sure you're providing that for all of your employees. And that's easier said than done, right? But I need the tools to be able to do my job, and I need the tools to be able to do it now from a virtual space. Number 2, probably most important, appoint a capable virtual leader. There is clarity in the research that in virtual teams, the role of the leader is the single most important role. They are the ones that model communication. They are the ones that set the tone. They set the pace. They are the ones who bring the team together or don't bring the team together. So we really want to be careful about training up our leaders right now if they've never been virtual leaders. So what I hope you're hearing in that is, let's not assume that a leader who's been a good leader, even a fine leader for 10, 15, 20 years, and all of a sudden has to lead virtually, let's not assume that the same skill sets that they've learned for the last decade or two to be successful as a people manager will be the same ones that will make them successful online. At the very minimum, it's not going to be the same ones. They're not going to be comprehensive. They're going to need some level of support, some level of training. Third is maintaining connection with your workforce and reminding yourself that they're people, right? So the emotive side, the social side, in addition to the workplace side, their needs specifically. That attention has to be there from the organization. So what I'd like you to do right now is just consider privately, how would you say that your organization is doing on these three essential responsibilities? If indeed you are overseeing a team that's gone virtual, maybe you went virtual 10 years ago, maybe you went virtual 10 days ago. If you're overseeing those teams, if you're supporting them in a training function, how is the organization doing for those teams? And recognizing that you may have gone virtual recently, what are the plans that you have in place to get to these essential responsibilities, especially in a time of sudden change? So if we kind of fast forward and we say, okay, let's just kind of look at some of the core or the key factors that are really critical for virtual teams. I would say a simplistic and probably oversimplified framework that I've just kind of put together is these four sort of buckets. You need the tools and the tech. They need to have really good communication. They need to be engaged, right? Because you can't see them, you can't hear them as much, and there needs to be team trust. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the power of team trust, but today specifically, we're going to zero in on communications. And as much as I'd love to talk about all these other things, we're really going to talk mostly about communication. And so because of that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to engage you for a moment. So we're going to turn on a poll with a very simple question with just 3 answers, and we'd like you to please respond to that poll right now. The question is, would you say that your virtual teams are communicating effectively? Please go ahead and enter your response to the poll right now. Looks like the polls are open. Just click the answer and the submit button, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at those results in just a second. One more second. Would you say that your virtual teams are communicating effectively?
I'm just going to give it a few more seconds to capture any last votes here.
Awesome.
All right, so I am going to close this poll and go ahead and share it.
Okay, great. I think we're seeing results here. That's awesome. Okay, guys, so Caitlin, what are you seeing?
So it looks like there's a few people who feel like they're doing great, which is nice. But it looks like a little bit more than half of us feel like we could use some improvement, 64%. And a 3% is not at all doing well. So they need a little more help.
Okay, that's awesome. So what I'm looking for is I'm hoping that all 3 of you, regardless of how you responded to that you're going to walk away with something and that you're going to be able to implement something after today. I'm going to share with you a lot about communication, and it comes from a place of someone who's been working online for approximately 15 years now. I've been an individual contributor, I've been a people manager, I've been a team mentor and a coach, I've been a faculty member, I've done all of these things online, working from home. And I've put together kind of some salient things that I'd like to share with you that come from that experience as well as come from research. And we've sort of bucketized these. You might recognize them from when you signed up for this, but what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the crucial elements that support high quality communication. By the way, there's a difference between communication and high quality communication. And number 2, we're going to look at some of the personal and organizational strategies that can impact and improve the effectiveness of virtual teams. Communication is at the crux of that. So here we go. These are the three areas that I have sort of structured our conversation around today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about setting norms, expectations, and predictability. I'd like to talk to you about mediating distance and maintaining connection. And then I'd like to talk with you about avoiding the trust trap. And this is going to be somewhat interactive in the sense that I'm going to rhythmically share around each one of these some thoughts, some tips, and then I'm going to invite you to self-assess. So I'd like you to begin to put yourself in the frame of mind of which virtual team did you join this session for? Is it you? Is it a team you lead? Is it many teams that you're training across an organization? Put that sort of thinking hat on so that you can begin to look at the information, not just for what it is, but how it applies specifically to your virtual team, because that's really where your takeaways are going to be. All right, so let's jump in. And we're going to start off with this idea of setting norms, expectations, and predictability. Probably one of the most important things to do for your virtual team, especially early on. The earlier, the better. So when folks have moved towards virtual work, especially if it was sudden, it doesn't have to be sudden though, but especially if it was, at the core, a lot of team members are simply wondering this very basic question. What am I supposed to be doing right now? What's supposed to be my focus? Harken back to Christmas time and the holidays. I don't know how much you guys are kind of on social media and you see these kind of funny memes that come out. But after the holidays, around that second, third, fourth day of January, I started seeing a lot of memes pop up from people who said, just coming back to work after a week or 2 weeks, and I have no idea what I do here anymore. I have no idea what the purpose of my life is. I'm a little bit disoriented, right? And if holidays can do that to us, if just a few days of leaving our routine can do something like that to us, where it takes us a little bit of wheel turning to get back into the rhythm of things, can you imagine what it would be for somebody to completely change the space and place of work for themselves, right? So it's no wonder that there's a question constantly around, what am I supposed to be doing right now? What is my focus? Now, usually in the workplace, we answer these questions through structure and through focus. We provide structure, and we provide opportunities for employees to focus so that they can get work done. But I'd like to juxtapose these a little bit. So historically, in an on-site work environment where I walk in the door of a workplace and I go sit down at my desk, structure comes in because there's a place of work. There's a building where I go to. There's a time where I come in to do work, and this is work time. There's a physicality to that experience that lends structure. I'm working right now, right? I'm not doing home management. I'm not doing pet sitting, and I'm not being overtaken by the 3-year-olds in the house that I'm having to share space with right now. Then also there's focus. So being able to engage an employee in a task happens a lot in on-site environments just from the physicality of things like you have a work desk. You sit down and you do work on that desk. You have a cubicle, you have work areas, you have meetings that you get invited to that focus you specifically on work tasks throughout the day. So there's a real physical element there. In contrast, in a virtual environment like this gentleman here, it's often up to the employee to create their own structure and to create their own focus. Now ask yourself if your employees are ready to do that. This can actually be very, very daunting, especially for new remote workers. And I often hear questions from new teams who just say, how do I even work now? Am I gonna have the tools that I need to be able to do my job? Or I hear this question so much, but a lot of folks are afraid to say it. In contrast, a team doing something that I'm not doing, right? Because there's a sense that you might be missing something. There's a sense that you might need a little bit more support than you're being given. And all of this can lead to uncertainty, loss of productivity, and worse, loss of employee engagement. Even the best individual contributors can actually disengage if there's an environment that doesn't provide them these tools to be successful in their work. So if you actually take the time to set the norms, the expectations, and the predictability, you're going to accomplish a couple of things. First, you're going to give employees parameters. We all need these. We all need to have continuity of communication necessary to complete our work tasks and remain productive. That means things like one-on-ones, team meetings, all of these should continue And they should not just be focused on, updates about the current environment, but they should also be very focused on work and what would normally happen in the space of work. It's also going to give structure. So it creates this continuity of the environment where we actually work, since that environment has changed so drastically. You may have gone from that beautiful corner office with wall-to-wall glass doors to your kitchen table with your laptop being full of spaghetti in it. I mean, these things are pretty impactful, and that structure is very, very important. Inviting focus, so helping guide employee engagement back to work tasks, productivity, and also the pace of work. This all requires intervention from the manager, from the organization. And if you do this stuff, it's actually going to go a long way to reducing frustration. That feeling of uncertainty, what am I supposed to be doing? What are others doing? Misunderstandings because I don't get to see people as much, frustrations with coworker interdependencies, and being able to know that I can still trust on my colleagues because I don't have the opportunity to get up, walk into their office and ask them for what I need. So now that you kind of know a little bit about what it is that this is, let's talk a little bit about some tips. Some just tips of how you might go about doing some of these things. So in terms of norms, when you're moving online, you want to rethink the ways that the team needs to work together. You want to think about things like the form and the format of how normal work is going to now occur virtually. These are often basic questions. They seem super obvious, but when they go unanswered, they have a tremendous ripple effect. So things like, when are we going to meet? When are we going to meet individually? When are we going to meet as a team? How are we going to discuss and resolve problems and come to decisions? I work with teams where folks don't know what to do when they hit a snag. And it seems so basic to ask for help, right? It seems like raising your hand and saying, I need something would be easy, but it needs to be reinforced and it needs to be talked about. And then things like, what tools are we going to use to communicate? Do you want to receive a text message that is 5 pages long? You probably don't, right? So you need to talk about what tools are we going to use? When are we going to use them? What are the tools that I can use when I need an answer from you in 5 minutes? What are the tools that can I use when I need an answer from you within the next day or so? Expectations. So being clear about what you expect from everyone is going to reduce disorientation, reduce disengagement, and it's going to mitigate the loss of the productivity that can come from the transition to virtual communication. This is so important because things like, when are we going to be online? We heard somebody earlier in the chat say, oh my gosh, I blinked and I worked 13 hours. That's what happens in an online environment. Oftentimes, I kind of hear from folks that they're on a spectrum. Either they're all the way on the left side where it's hard to focus, hard to find structure, and they're kind of distracted, or I hear the spectrum all the way on the right side of I wake up and I sit to work and I blink and it's 7 o'clock at night, right? And dinner's not started and I haven't taken care of myself and I haven't paid attention to my own sort of well-being and basic meals and those kinds of things. So it's super important that you talk about things. Now ask yourself, what are the expectations around response times to employee to manager, peer to peer, and to customers? And super important, time zones. Do you really want your employees working, if they're working across 3 or 4 time zones, do you really want them available across all of the hours represented by all of those time zones? Because that can be a daunting experience in and of itself, right? But folks still need to be able to communicate and collaborate, even if it is across time zones. So there has to be an idea of, how am I going to go to the people that I need for what I need, and what is it going to look like to get the answers that I need? And then also, how do I escalate, right? And here I don't want to gloss over the fact that just like we can't assume that a really good manager, a really good leader who's been a rock star leader for years is going to be a rock star from a virtual manager, we can't expect the same thing from employees either. Just because somebody has the capability to be online, to send emails, and to join a Zoom call doesn't inherently make them effective virtual communicators. It doesn't mean that they're reducing bottlenecks, being efficient, and creating trust relationships with their peers, and balancing organizational needs and realities. All of those things come with training. They come with development, and we need to invest in employees to be able to do that. The last one is around predictability. This is important because if you as a manager begin to set a tone for communication and you say, my door is always open, let's connect, but then you fall through on something like that, or if you're supposed to be meeting on a weekly basis and all of a sudden you go online and it's been 3 or 4 weeks since you haven't met, that's going to build on the uncertainty. Same thing with the fact of cascading communication consistently. If there's decisions being made about the current environment, about moving virtually, about development that's going to be provided to employees, all that needs to make its way down to employees as consistently and as quickly as possible. And then, as I highlighted already, the manager is so important in this. The manager sets the tone for communication. And so a really simple example of that is if you are the team manager and you don't expect people to be working at 8 o'clock at night, don't send them emails at 8 o'clock at night, right? Unless it starts with something like, hey, I'm just catching up on some stuff, but don't feel the pressure to respond until morning. And they'll begin to pick up on those cues and those expectations, and they'll begin to realize what it is you actually expect of them, right? Because again, when you don't have the information, you fill it in yourself. So I'm going to pause for a second, and I'm going to invite you to reflect over this little section of setting norms, expectations, and predictability. And maybe even use this simple little assessment that I do here, where you can reflect, as I asked you to, about the team for why you're joining this call. Are you guys doing well? Are you guys needing improvement in this area? Or are you fully aware of where you need improvement? You've got plans in place and you say, you know what, it's in progress, as in I have a date by when I'm going to be able to say that this is actually done. So take a second, jot that down for yourself. If you'd like to, post it for us in the questions. And let me just pause for a minute and see, Caitlin, are you seeing anyone share on this? Because if they're sharing, I'd like to recognize that, but you don't have to share.
Yeah, we are. I think we're seeing more people who are saying they need improvement than others. So I think the time zones thing is definitely a point that I'm seeing come through a lot. Some people are in progress, some people are working on it, but mostly needs improvement and in progress.
Awesome, awesome. So again, I hope these tips were helpful, but you will get this step, right? So something for you at least kind of go back to and think about. Okay, let's jump right into one of my favorites which is about mediating distance and maintaining connection. The reason I think this is so cool is because I mentioned to you earlier, communication is not the same thing as high quality communication, right? But the crosswalk between those two, kind of like that good to great model, is actually a little bit arduous. It's a little bit of effort that it takes, but I think the outcome is really, really good. So let's talk about it a little bit. Effective communication, first of all, is more than transactional interactions. Just because I send an email to ask you for something and you reply back and you give me the thing I'm asking for, that's sort of transactional. That gets work done, that gets the job done, but it's not genuine collaboration that evokes the types of things that I'm saying here. So I hear all the time from managers, can you come work with us because I want my team to be very vulnerable with each other, transparent, proactive. I want them to speak up and I want them to share ideas. I want them to not come to me for every answer and take risks. I want them to not have misunderstandings at every turn with their employees. I want them to have respect for each other and appreciate differences. Guys, this does not come through transactional communication. This actually comes through more effort. And when you look into the research, what this comes from is when there's transparency and awareness of team members and awareness of the organization and how you fit into it, you begin to create something called shared context, which in another sort of overly simplified term might be common ground. And when you begin to establish that, you can actually begin to go beyond transactional communication and into relationship forming. The challenge is that in a virtual environment, teams not only become susceptible to just transactional communication and not relationship forming communication, but they also become vulnerable to something called virtual distance. And virtual distance makes it all the more harder for you to create that shared context with peers in the organization. So let's let's disaggregate what virtual distance actually means for just a second. So first of all, you might say, oh gosh, okay, virtual distance, that has to be caused by the fact that we're not working in the same building anymore, right? Or it has to be caused by the fact that we're not all on the Eastern time zone. That's what people think is the culprit to virtual distance, and research shows that's not the case at all. It isn't the physical dimension that creates virtual distance. In fact, virtual distance is experienced by teams in three different ways. First, physical distance, that's the one we think about the most. That's, I used to work in the same building with you, but now I don't. Now I'm working from my kitchen table, and now you're working from yours. Operational distance is sort of the noise, the challenge, the processes of how we go about getting things done. Harkening back to that slide about the more bottlenecks, the more challenges, the greater the operational distance between me getting my work done effectively. And then there's this really cool concept of affinity distance. And this is all about what degree of relational and human connection do your team members have? How much of that do they actually have? And here's the cost of not addressing virtual distance. And I think it's going to be pretty surprising to you. This is out of the Harvard Business Review, but take a look at some of what happens when you thrust a team virtually to work online and you don't work on virtual distance. Innovative behaviors fall by 90%. Trust goes down by 80%. Project success by 50%. Right? Cooperative behaviors where I want to help you as my colleague and you want to help me rather than just transactional stuff, that goes down by 80%. And it's one of the #1 skills that managers tell me, can you please come work with my team to help us become more collaborative and tear down silos and have people not think of themselves as just, I'm in this team and in this department, but to think of the broader organization at large. These are all sort of symptoms of virtual distance in many cases. So how do we actually look for ways to reduce virtual distance when it has very little to do with physical things? Here are a couple of tips. So you're going to want to think a lot about transparency of team communication and the kinds of things that we're talking about, the kinds of communication. So you're going to want to look to create that shared context, remember common ground. So that means baseline, you're going to want to increase social connections with the team members. The fewer and the less often we connect, the less common ground and shared context we can actually develop. You're also going to want to ask your different team members to showcase their contributions regularly, because when you do that, I, as a member of the team, get a sense of what they bring to the table, what puzzle piece they bring specifically, and that begins to create that shared context of understanding ourselves, not as islands, but as part of the organization. And then you're also going to want to do this side that I think we've neglected so much in virtual spaces, and that's humanizing team members. There was a study done by the Kellogg School of Management where they had people go off and do an assignment, peers in a corporate setting, go off and do an assignment just on email. The instructions were you can only use email. And they came back after a week and they found out that the results were not really good. Very few people have been able to arrive at a positive, satisfactory solution. Number two, blame game and saying this person didn't do this was pretty heavy. It's pretty high up there. They made one change and they ran the experiment again. They actually provided photos of the person to each other. You're going to be working with this person on this problem. And then they had them connect for just a few minutes, even a basic 10-minute phone call, to get to know themselves first, to get to know each other first before starting the project. And what they found was project success went up, misunderstandings went down, the time to completion went down. I mean, the effects of humanizing team members were absolutely amazing. And the Myers-Briggs Company is really good at supporting you in this area in terms of helping you by coming in with psychometric assessments like the MBTI, like the TKI, like the FIRO, and helping team members better understand the human part of their colleagues, the human part of themselves, right? And learn to appreciate those differences. Now, I've thrown this in here because I want to recognize that there are special circumstances that require you to look specifically at the frequency of communication. Remember that we're talking right now about how to mediate the distance, how to maintain connection. So if your team that you are directly working with or that you're part of falls into a special circumstance, and I've listed a few here, you're going to need more communication than a normal virtual team. So for example, if we just became a newly formed team, so that means if I didn't already have knowledge of the 5 to 10 people that I'm going to work with online, and you just put us together and you called us a team and we're working virtually, we're going to need more communication because our shared context is low. My humanizing of team members is low. My understanding of what they bring to the table versus what I bring to the table is low, right? And knowing what the team does at large is not the same thing as those other things. Also, if the team is going through a high level of uncertainty or disruption, a virus, a sudden need to move online, that requires all the more frequency of communication. And whatever amount of communication you're picturing in your head right now, it's more than that. More than likely, it's more than what you're even thinking. Also, if the organization is going through major change, if you're revamping, if you're reinventing yourself, if you're rolling out new products, new services, if you've done a major overhaul right now of your organizational structure and your org chart has changed, more communication. This is a big one. If the team that you have formed, doesn't matter if they've been working together for 5 years or for 5 months, if the diversity of that team is high, and that diversity can be even personality diversity, it could be diversity of backgrounds and cultures. The higher the diversity, the more opportunities for misunderstandings, the more opportunities for folks that need time to not talk about just work. They need time to learn about each other, where that person's coming from, what makes them tick, how that person is motivated, how they're passionate about the work that they do, right? All of these things, same thing with personality styles. When I work with teams that are really, let's say, eclectic, right, in their team diversity, they think team diversity is great. That's awesome, right? That automatically means we're going to have better ideas and better solutions. Not automatically, unfortunately. In order to turn team diversity into team chemistry, you got to have self-awareness on every team member's part. You have to have awareness of others, and you've got to translate those skills into appreciation of differences. Because if I don't value and appreciate the difference that you bring to the table, I'm not going to ask you for it, right? I'm not going to reach out to you and collaborate with you. But if I do, I'm going to go to you and I'm going to say, I'm facing this problem. I don't quite know how to solve it. How does it look from your seat in this thing? What do you see? What am I missing? Right? So, okay, I think I've kind of clarified a little bit about what that looks like specifically, but I wanted to sort of mention these special circumstances. And then one more that I want to give you in terms of tips in this section, and that's the idea of, I know this is super simplistic, but the types of things that your teams are communicating about. So whether you're talking every 5 minutes or whether you're talking every 5 days, what are the things that you're talking about? On the left-hand column, we have formal conversations. Those are team meetings or one-on-ones. You've sent out a calendar invite. I've accepted it. I'm joining a phone call. I'm talking to you one-on-one as my manager, and we're talking about what's on my plate, what you see coming, etc. Or we're meeting together as a team, and we're talking mostly right now about work-based tasks. What's coming in the pipeline? What do we need to work on? What do we need to maybe reprioritize, etc. The stuff on the left-hand side, that gets work done, but it doesn't create shared context, and it doesn't create a propensity and a motivation for me to take the extra step to not just send you a transactional email, but to try to build a relationship with you. So we've got to have the communication that's on the right-hand side. We've got to have informal communications as a team. What are you doing? What are you experiencing right now? Have the kids overtaken your household? And are you sending us an SOS because you need help from us right now? Do you need to have adult conversations for 5 minutes so that you remind yourself of the type of work that you do, or informal individual conversation? How are you doing? How is working online going for you? How are you able to connect your work right now with the new mission of the organization and where we're going? Where do you see your place in that? Conversations that are a little bit more informal and a little bit more about the person And we, of course, want to be authentic about these conversations. We have all been in instances where somebody tried to create what I call small talk chatter, not real relationship building. Nobody wants to respond to like small talk chatter. We don't just want to tell you what did we have for lunch yesterday. I get that. That can be funny. That can be cool, right? But you're not going to learn much about me as an individual and what motivates me and building a strong relationship with me by learning something like that, right? You're not going to create that relationship with me as strongly if we're only talking about the weather, right? So we need to facilitate some of these conversations. And guess what? The manager is the number one role in this. The manager sets the tone. If you jump on a phone call and you are immediate go to business, don't expect the relational conversations to happen, right? Because folks are going to take the tone from it. Folks are going to take what you're doing and you're modeling it for them, whether you realize that or not. Okay, so that kind of is the mediating distance and maintaining connection. I want to make sure and still have time to cover the trust trap with you. But again, let's pause for a moment. Give me some feedback on, for this section in particular, how are you guys doing? Do you feel like you're doing really well? You are figuring out a way to bridge that gap of virtual distance? Do you need improvement? Do you need progress? Are you seeing that transition from transactional to relationship building in an authentic way? What are you guys seeing? And of course, if you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Even what are you seeing?
So most of the people are saying needs improvement. And I did see a few questions come through about using video and how that can affect the relationship versus not using video. People who aren't used to using Zoom and Skype and things like that, and how that can either help or hurt maybe relationships that they've had. So mostly needs improvement or in progress.
So I thank you, first of all, to everybody who's being willing to share. We love that. I love that you're paying attention and you're engaged in this. And I love that you're saying, okay, there's some improvement, because that tells me you heard something that you're going to walk away with. You've heard something that you're going to take with you, right? And I mean, but that's what we're doing. So in terms of the question about video, I love the video. And so first, a confession. I have a preference, if you know anything about the MBTI, I have a preference for introversion. I do not want to be on a video call every single time I meet. There are already days where if the number of meetings on my calendar is really, really high, and I feel like I've been talking all day long, and I'm having to articulate my thoughts because you can't see my head spinning and whirling with thoughts, so I've got to get those thoughts out verbally to you. The more that happens, the more I become fatigued, and I have to focus on my self-care and all those kinds of things. And, you know, I guess I venture to think that there will be folks, even with a preference for extroversion, that may not have a good hair day sometimes. And so for some instances, you're not going to want to use video all the time. But what I do think is awesome is if you prepare people for it. And so, for example, in the experiment that the Kellogg School of Management did that I told you about, let folks know you're going into a newly formed team. So, for example, if Caitlin and I had never worked together, our managers could have set up a phone call and could have said, be prepared, you're going to use video, and the call is 2 days from now. Great. We'll use video. I'll get to see Caitlin. I get to see her facial expressions. And as we know from that experiment, it's going to humanize her to me. Her seeing me is going to humanize me to her. And it's going to boost our project success. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt more because I'm not just seeing her words on a text. I'm seeing her face, right? I'm seeing her expressions. So I would say everything in balance and pre-warn people about those things, especially right now. We want to be super sensitive right now, and I'm so impressed by so many organizations who are being really flexible with this right now. But folks are thrust right now into a virtual context that have never been thrust into that before, and they may not even have a dedicated workspace. They may not even have a babysitter, somebody to help with the kids. Now is not the time to make every meeting video. So I hope that helps. Yes, do the video. Awesome idea on humanizing people. Just do it in balance and do it before them. Okay, so let's look at this avoiding the trust trap. This one is sort of the capstone of what we've been talking about so far. So in my 15 or so years of working in all kinds of roles in virtual teams, If the first two do not happen, teams fall into a trust trap, which is why I'm putting this here, because you guys can actually use the first two sections that we've looked at to avoid this. So it turns out, research has demonstrated that high quality communication, moving beyond the transaction, high quality communication in virtual teams is directly linked to interpersonal trust. And guess what? It's in turn linked to individual and team performance and productivity. That means the degree of trust that I have between myself and my manager and between the other employees on my team has a direct link to my team performance and productivity. That enough makes it to where we need to work on trust, right? Because who doesn't want to work on team performance and productivity? Also, high quality communication in teams accomplishes something very, very powerful. Think of Caitlin and I, for example. She's in California, I'm in Florida. If we're communicating with each other very sporadically, and I have a distrust of whether she's going to give me what I need on a project, and she has that same distrust of me, our communication is going to break down. But if I see from her high quality communication, she's been trained on how to give that to me, I've been trained on how to give that to her, it accomplishes this. It gives me reassurance that she's attending to the task at hand. It gives her reassurance that I'm attending to work, and it increases the trust that I have with her and mutually. It increases cohesiveness and it supports stronger working relationships. So all that to say, we're not going to be able to move beyond the transactional and into relationship forming and into genuine collaboration if our communication isn't of high quality, if those relationships and that trust isn't there. In fact, everything that I've been talking about so far has been to try to help you boost your team's communication even up a notch, just by a little bit, so that you can start to move towards high quality communication because of these important gains like this. And just like I showed you the cost of virtual distance, what happens when a virtual team suffers from a lack of trust? So if Caitlin and I don't trust each other and we're having to collaborate on these projects, there's a little bit of a slippery slope. First, I can become hesitant to give her my input. We all need these. We all need to have. So that means you presented an idea, you presented a process, something that you're going to do at work. And in my mind, I'm not thrilled with it. I can see holes in it already, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to be hesitant to provide that input. Secondly, I might be unwilling to show my real motives or share information. I might have already worked on something that could save you 2 hours of time or 2 days of time, and I'm not going to share it with you because I don't trust you, or vice versa. And guys, this sounds like some kind of discussion around being passive aggressive. This is not. This is real in teams. This happens on a constant basis, and you make decisions almost subconsciously in an instant about whether you're going to provide input openly, whether you're going to share your motives and share information, and it's all rooted in trust. This can continue to escalate to where I actually intentionally hold back knowledge that would be important to the team, knowledge that would be important to my manager. And then even worse, it can get to the point where we take advantage of it. It can get to the point where it doesn't matter to me if you're wasting time, if you're spinning your wheels, you do you and I do me, right? That's what happens. And managers come to us and they tell us, help me break down silos. This is the stuff they're talking about. They're talking about folks who have an inherent lack of trust, whether it's articulated or not. And I think the biggest fallacy with trust is to gauge team trust by the cordiality between team members. So I can be super cordial with Caitlin and she can be super cordial with me, but that doesn't mean we trust each other. It does not mean she will trust me and co-depend on me in a work environment, right? And here's what happens when low quality communication is present. We see task and process breakdown because we're not sharing information, right? We're seeing silos. I'm disengaging because I'm not seeing passionate other colleagues that are trying to fulfill the mission of this organization, working on their passions. I'm leaving, I'm disengaging, right? Because I want to do something satisfying with my work. So I'm going to step away from this organization. If the communication quality is high, productivity is going to go up, morale is going to go up. Absolutely powerful stuff, right? So again, here we go, avoiding the trust trap. How would you say your team is doing on this? Is there real trust on your team? Are you doing well? Do you think this is an area that could use some improvement? Or are you saying, we've got a plan for this, it's in progress? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you folks kind of share there, and we're going to see what Caitlin starts to see real quick.
Yeah, so most of them are needs improvement to definitely needs improvement. Some people feel like they know how to handle this, but I think there's also a lot of stuff coming in about how the managers may be affecting this in different ways, whether it's the environments that they're creating, or if people don't trust their management, it can cause problems a little bit wider.
That's absolutely true. That's such a good point. So thank you everybody for sharing. We all know that problems with our manager is still the number one cited reason why folks leave an organization. These could be really talented, good folks who really just want to do good work. So we already know that the role of the manager is super, super important. And every manager on your staff should be willing to go through development to improve their leadership skills, not for themselves necessarily, but for their team members, to give their team members what they need. So we're going to take a step back right now. And I just want you to think about these now across three. We talked about coming into virtual work, and maybe you did it 10 years ago, but you never spent time setting norms, expectations. You haven't focused as much on creating a predictable rhythm of communication and work. So think about how you kind of self-assess in that area. Then there's mediating distance and maintaining connection, and the idea that transactional communication will get the job done, but it's not going to get us the things we really want. It's not going to get us creativity, higher levels of engagement, higher levels of innovation, higher levels of genuine collaboration. I don't mean just I did my piece of creating this object and now I hand it to the next person and we at some point end up with a completed object. That's just completion of tasks. We're talking here specifically about genuine collaboration. And then there was the concept of avoiding the trust trap, right? Giving people a sense of that co-trust mutually on the team where they can take shared risks, where they can share their input, where they can provide information to each other, and making sure to watch for those subtle starts that they don't escalate into something alarming. So if you can, I'd like you to type in the question box just kind of what's going through your mind right now. Give me a short phrase around, as you look at the whole thing and you take a step back, what's going through your mind. And while you do that, I'm just going to kind of transition us to the end here. And I'm going to see, and I'm going to show you something that I'm not going to go through it, but you're going to get it in your PowerPoint. So if you're saying to yourself, you know what, I answered that I need improvement, or I see opportunities for improvement in at least one of those areas, you might want to take this as kind of an immediate action plan. Again, I know this may look simple. It's not easy to do. I'm giving you kind of a progress and a process. You need to step in and you need to assess how your team is communicating currently and be brutally honest with yourself. Where is it working? Where is it not working? Where could it be better? Where are people figuring out how to move around bottlenecks, but the bottleneck is still there? So where are folks interacting transactionally, but they could be building relationships? Then you want to figure out how that communication is helping the team or not. That's obviously very customized to your team because you know what the team is responsible for doing. Then you want to take some time figuring out your employee needs around this. We're not going to assume that good people managers know how to be good people managers online. Same thing with employees. Align developmental resources to train them, basic webinars, all the way up to courses, whatever it might be, and bring in outside help. You don't always see the full picture on your own. And I love it when leaders and managers just get us on a phone call and talk to us about their teams specifically. And then if you are a manager, you have to model high quality communication. And I'd like you to jot down this URL right now, because if you liked any of the content we talked about today, there's oodles more of it at the Myers-Briggs.com/go virtual, including the release of 3 brand new webinar series specifically dedicated for teams that happen 100% virtually. With that, Caitlin, do you want to give me kind of a quick summary of what folks said?
So a lot of people are thinking about the timeliness of this, and we are seeing quite a bit of people saying they're going to take this back to their teams, which is great to hear. And so I know we didn't get time for questions today, which is totally fine. We do have the questions that were submitted, and we will be following up with them so we can get a little bit more deep into those questions in emails in a couple of days.
That is awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your interest in the Myers-Briggs Company, and thank you for your engagement. Stay safe, and I hope to see you in another webinar of ours very soon.